Welcome to UNCAGED, a show that celebrates thought leadership from today's top business leaders. The program provides a voice to amazing executives from around the globe who are shaping the world of business today and mapping the path to the commerce of tomorrow. Today, we're speaking with BJ Schaknowski. Hey, BJ, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks, Brent.
It's great to talk to you, BJ. BJ is the CEO at simplr. simplr is a really innovative company committed to improving healthcare operations and providing better outcomes for patients, providers, payers, and staff. And we'll go deeper on what simplr is actually working on in a little bit. But before we get there, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, BJ, and your career to date?
Yeah, more than happy to. So I'm almost 25-year software veteran now. Actually started off a little bit differently. I enlisted in the United States Marine Corps infantry reserves coming out of college and thought I was going to make a career out of that. Fortunately, somewhere along the way, I thought it would be a lot safer to sell software than it might be to go down that path, and found my way in the late 90s into selling technology, selling hardware and software, which then very quickly turned into a career in software. I've been fortunate enough to work with some of the most amazing software companies in the world. Intuit, Sage Software, worked for CA Technologies for a little while, which is now obviously part of Broadcom. Worked for LexisNexis as the head of sales, services, and marketing. I've had almost every job that you can have, leading every function inside of a software company except for product management and development and finance. Spent the last 4 years with a private equity-backed insurtech company, Vertafore. And joined simplr as the CEO last November. So I'm actually on day 368 now.
Awesome. And, well, yeah, that's great. I mean, I could tell that you're keeping close track and probably making big progress on every one of those days. So tell us a little bit more about simplr and what you guys are working on.
Yeah, happy to. simplr, and really the reason I joined simplr exists to actually improve the back end of healthcare. And when I was looking at different opportunities, there were a few things that really made simplr such an attractive role and organization for me to join and help lead. The first one is I got to know chief medical officers. I did a little bit of diligence myself right before joining the company, and I understood the thesis and I understood what simplr was trying to solve. And as you talk to folks inside of healthcare, every one of them will tell you to a man or woman that the back end of healthcare operations is a disaster. Right? It is unbelievably complex. There are no data, right? Systems don't talk to each other. It's unbelievably fragmented, right? You spend these amazing healthcare workers spend too many hours in front of computer screens instead of actually providing care, right? It's riddled with inconsistencies and error. Yeah. And so there was just this, in technology, right? Automation and technology has shown I worked in insurance, I worked in legal. We've proven that you can apply technology and really make significant improvements, right, to the workflow, to the processes, to the operations of any different vertical. The other piece is if you look at what's happened during the pandemic, right, and I joined simplr 8 months into the pandemic,
right?
It actually has shown a spotlight of what these operational deficiencies mean to patients, right? And I think as importantly to healthcare workers. When you hear the stories in the nightly news of the nurses working 14 or 16-hour shifts, right? That's criminal. Now, no one knows why that's happening. They think it's because of COVID. No, it's actually because their HRIS system doesn't talk to their staffing and scheduling system, and nurses who haven't been on the payroll in 2 years are getting thrown on there, and there's no one there to cover their shifts. So these amazing heroes say, hey, I've got it, and we'll work ridiculous hours. Or how about the doctors recently retired who are ready to get tagged in to provide COVID care, right, who will have to wait 4 or 5 months because they can't get their credentials reinstated, right? And meanwhile, you've got overflowing ERs and no beds left with patients who are ready to be treated, and you have providers. So you now hear these things, and the time is really right, for some of this operational transformation. And you combine that with really now a moral imperative to create standardization where there's been typically so much fragmentation within healthcare systems, right? If you have a 70 facility healthcare system, until now, most of those facilities were allowed to do whatever they wanted, right? Well, when you have a 40% nursing shortage and you have to move nurses from one facility to another, and they're all running different products or different tools or different systems, that portability is further hindered. So anyways, there are all these operational deficiencies. And then you look at the opportunity simplr has, right? And you have these massive EMR providers, you have massive ERP providers, you have massive rev cycle providers, but everything else in the middle, those 200 point products that healthcare systems may need, they don't talk to each other. They don't look like each other, right? They have highly variable data security and privacy standards. And so the thesis of simplr is, let's go actually pick the right best in breed products, bring them under a single corporate umbrella, create an amazing enterprise level standard, right, of SLAs, right, engagement level competency, data security and privacy, right, UX, UI, but also more importantly, create interoperability, right? Turn them into a real platform where nursing leaders aren't transferring data from here to there 3 times, right? Or where systems don't talk to each other that obviously should, like access and credentialing or contract and spend, right? And so we basically categorize it into 3 areas. We're acquiring assets, we're building a world-class company, and we're about 40% of our way through that journey. And it's been amazing.
That's great. So BJ, when simplr works with, I'm assuming kind of like healthcare groups, or tell me a little bit about kind of how you guys tackle problems and who those key clients are.
Yeah, so we're very fortunate. 90%, 91% to be precise, of the 1,600 plus healthcare systems in the United States are running at least one simplr product today. 25% of the payers and about 3,100 post-acute providers, typically long-term care and senior living. And so many of them are solving one problem with simplr. And where we've seen a lot of success, particularly working with the mid-size and the larger systems, is as they look to standardize and leverage technology, we're working with those chief compliance officers, chief medical officers, typically driven by your chief information officers, on how we can help drive automation and standardization. And so that may be with the workforce organization, right? Where we can now basically do hire through retire talent management, everything from acquiring and onboarding new talent to scheduling and staffing, to time and attendance, performance optimization, learning and development, and even physician and nursing now team scheduling. So we can help them with talent management. We can help them with provider data management. We can putting the right provider with the patient who needs it with a good digital front door, contract and spend. So it really depends on what that system is working on at that moment in time, right? And what the pandemic, frankly, has done to them. But we typically align with 1, 2, or 3 of their strategic initiatives around standardization.
And then slowly but surely, you can kind of integrate more and more systems as the provider wakes up to the need to be
they
simpler.
All know. They all know. The bigger question they have, honestly, Ben, is not, do we need this? It's where do we start?
Right? Yeah. So I was kind of trying to get a sense of that. I mean, I certainly think that the healthcare system has had problems for quite a while now. And there's been this kind of, I guess, digital opportunity in the healthcare space for at least for a decade, but it doesn't seem like it's moved forward fast enough, at least at the pace of other verticals. And when you look at that, I mean, how does that fit into what's happening in the healthcare space today?
I mean, I think it's unbelievably consistent, right? And again, the pandemic is this new catalyst for change, right? The financial profile of healthcare systems have been dramatically impacted. The type of patient care it's providing, right? The workforce shortage it has is unprecedented, right? And so now all of a sudden we have to look at technology to automate where we used to rely on people. What had been historically an unbelievable aversion to change inside of healthcare, because I mean, think about what's at stake, right? It's not illogical to think why this was hard, because people have been doing it the same way to get to an outcome, and that's what they knew, right? And change is dangerous, change is scary, change is hard. But now you have this mandate and this imperative, and then you couple that with the simple fact that there hadn't been a simplr, right? You've got Cerner and Epic on the EMR EHR. You've got the your Infors and your Workdays doing ERPs. You've got all your rev cycle shops. You didn't have one person to turn to and say, help. If you were a CIO, had to go try to cobble together some patchwork infrastructure of third-party vendors and try to make this work. And that's hard.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of healthcare CIOs hadn't come.
It's hard to understand, right? I mean, in the sense that, everybody comes in and, there's so many different acronyms and they all seem like they do some of the same things. And you realize that, when you're a practitioner, you realize they don't do the same things. And then you're trying to weave it together. And yeah, it's really, really tricky. So, I mean, it's great to see many of these healthcare groups embrace this stuff right now. And I'd just be kind of curious, changing gears a little bit, looking at the last 18 months as you've gotten your feet under you at simplr, how those discussions have evolved during the pandemic. What challenges were some of your customers facing? Clearly, obviously, some COVID related stuff. And has it offered opportunities to maybe accelerate dialogues? I'd be curious.
Yeah. So it's funny, right? You had this consolidation, certainly within the top 100 systems or so, right? And so they themselves were highly either acquisitive or doing a lot of mergers to build these very, very, very large systems. And they were running largely effectively, right? But again, there wasn't this mandate, right? There wasn't this standardization tailwind that's now entered the market. And I think one of the biggest things, frankly, is you've got increased regulatory oversight, right? Mm-hmm. You now have the Office of the Inspector General, who is very, very serious, as they likely should be, right? But they're going now system by system and looking for these regulatory compliance initiatives. And so, these can be $50, $100 million fines to systems that are already now crippled by, right, the macroeconomic conditions facing them. So the convergence of those two things, again, how many different
and what is the major concern there? Is privacy or?
Well, it's reasonably broad, right?
Okay.
But if you think about the federal regulations relative to healthcare, who sees what patients, how people are paid, making sure you have contract compliance, provider credentialing compliance, right? Making sure you have incident reporting, remediation, right? That's federally compliant. And so there is a mountain of compliance that you have to have. It's why you actually see the emergence in many of the larger systems of a very powerful, and rightly so, chief compliance officer to oversee those components of healthcare operations. That's great for simplr, and that's great for them that we exist, because now we have almost 2,000 people that think about this and only this every day, that they can lean on and say, hey, I've got to remain compliant. I don't want to get a corporate integrity agreement violation. How do I make sure that my credentialing aligns with my physician contracting, right? So that we're not putting uncredentialed physicians in front of patients, or that we're paying uncredentialed physicians, right? That we're reporting incidents, right? Whether it be slip and fall, whether it be misdiagnosis or misprescribed drugs. So these conditions are not insignificant, right? And oh, by the way, no system wants to get these wrong. They actually all want to be better. They just don't know how to, or traditionally haven't known how to leverage technology to get there.
Yeah, it's the integration element is so fascinating. I think anybody who has been a patient at any healthcare facility has seen those integration challenges from the customer side. And I can only imagine it gets much, much worse. I always remember, going to see a specialist, and, the specialist would write notes. The notes would be then dictated by the nurse's dictation would then be sent to a data center in India. It then would have to come back and get evaluated for accuracy and then filed. I was like,
it's like my 6-year-old kids playing telephone on the playground. Who knows what comes back around the other side? Think about the different touch points and the opportunity and the risk for error.
So many errors. Yeah, exactly. So much risk. So, BJ, I can see the incredible need for what you guys are delivering at simplr. And, as you look forward over the next year, 2 years, what's exciting to you? Where do you see this thing shaping?
The great news is we have no shortage of work and opportunities to help these systems, these payers, these post-acute facilities. What I'm most excited about is, and I get to tell my kids, when I took this job, when I was in insurance, I helped people sell more insurance. When I was in legal, I helped lawyers make more money. Neither of those are exactly, what you want to come home and tell your kids. If simplr does its job, and if we work with these systems and we create real operational improvement, at the end of the day, nurses are going to work more time in front of patients, right? They're going to work the right shifts. Providers are going to be credentialed. And frankly, more people will be seen by the right providers. At the end of the day, we'll actually benefit patient outcomes. Because the more well-run these systems are, the data has shown this, but the more well-run healthcare systems are operationally, the better they are at providing patient outcomes. And that's what healthcare is all about. And that's what we can actually enable for them.
And I just can kind of see that the world's just going to continue to evolve so rapidly. So have to get this stuff sorted out as quickly as possible. I saw the news about CVS obviously consolidating their stores, and really around this idea that they want to almost turn CVS into a healthcare network, which is fascinating, right?
There's, I mean, it's and even if you look at the whole dynamic, right, of how healthcare, the revenue associated with healthcare, right, the payments associated with healthcare, right, and the shift towards value-based care, right, the shift away from seeing as many patients as you can to actually providing meaningful outcomes and healing patients, right. There's a lot of different operational components to making that a reality. And the great news for simplr is, there will be a need for us to help standardize and automate regardless of the direction that the regulatory componentry goes, that the revenue component goes. And we just want to make healthcare simpler, no pun intended, so that the patients and the workers receive the benefit of that.
And we all want it as well. So BJ, thank you so much for telling us about what you guys are working on. If someone wanted to learn more about what simplr's up to and what you're up to, where should they find you?
Simplr.com, SYMPLR.com, or follow us. We're pretty active on social media, so Twitter and LinkedIn as well. We try to put out a lot of good information, not just about us, but also about what's happening in the category. Some really good thought leadership so that anyone who's involved in healthcare can benefit from some of the content we're pushing.
Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us on UNCAGED today. And I'm really excited about what you guys are working on, and look forward to checking in and seeing what you guys are up to in the near future.
That's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, buddy. Cheers.